Welcome to Chelsea's Vocation. Chelsea raised 2 children on the autism spectrum, Justice and Noe, into adulthood. They're the reason why she can't help but smile when she recognizes autism in another human, especially a child. Chelsea spent almost 2 decades studying this neurotype as a parent professional, learning how to better adapt her own behavior and the environment around autistic children to both encourage and foster their development. She hopes through this podcast that you might better understand how neurotypical people process your neurology if you're autistic, or how to better yourself as someone who values autistic humans and your relationship with them. Chelsea is a lifelong learner and expects you are too, so don't hesitate to reach out to her through social media comments or the contact form on our website with your own insights. If you're coming to this podcast after the first 5 episodes, you may want to go to the show and review 1 or more of those foundational episodes to know where she's coming from. Either way, we're glad you're here now.
When I was pregnant with my firstborn, I remember really hoping I would have a boy first and then a girl. I had this 2-dimensional ideal of having a big brother looking out for a little sister. I did not have the foresight to realize they would both be going through the throes of puberty at the same time. Compound the biochemical changes of puberty with both of our kids being on psychoactive medications, and our household was thrown into a multi-year chaos it seemed no one prepared me for. We ended up with new diagnoses, new medications, and new coping strategies. So for the last dozen or so years, I've been gently but emphatically encouraging parents to buckle up in the year or 2 before the hormones go bananas. To me, that means having a team in place or knowing where the resources are to add tools to the parenting and co-regulation toolbox efficiently and effectively. While I generally discourage parents from avoiding medicating their children to optimize brain function and mood, I deliberately encourage them to pair medication with talk therapy. Psychiatrists exist to manage medications and symptoms, period. Psychologists, therapists, and counselors are able to apply their array of tools and techniques to a child's perception of environmental inputs in order to better equip that child's toolbox with what's needed as those inputs disrupt their state of being. And don't underestimate how impactful psychotherapy can be for you as parents. We all do better when we know better. One of the greatest blessings of being a parent professional in this community for the last 2 decades is getting to know the rock stars of the business. And my guest today is an absolute rock star. Somewhere along the way, she was on a panel of experts talking about autism in adolescents. After my kid's psychotherapist retired and Justice was diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, I started looking for someone to treat his anxiety. The complexity of his comorbid diagnoses both frightened off a lot of providers in the area and made effective treatment almost impossible. Katrina was unfazed by the challenge and has been working with Justice for many years. I am honored that she's willing to be on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I am honored to have been asked to do this.
That is kind. So, Katrina, my buckle up pep talk is probably way less helpful than it could be. What are your recommendations for preparing for the impact puberty will have on an autistic adolescent?
Well, puberty is such a big topic. It's a little word that encompasses so many different things. I think the biggest thing is to get prepared early, to really look for things that you can start practicing, you can start doing before you're starting to notice the signs, before, you're in the throes of puberty and then trying to teach new routines and adapt to changes when the hormones are on board. It's a matter of predicting what might be happening and then kind of throwing that out the window a little bit when all this stuff happens differently than you expected. But it really is thinking ahead and going, okay, so once the hormones are on board, once puberty starts, that's not the time to be learning new skills. That's the time where in the years prior, we can kind of pre-teach those skills and we can say, okay, when you're not in the throes of hormonal change and everything about your life is changing, your body's changing, your thinking is changing, your emotions are changing, there's all this change. If we can be prepared for some of that before that all happens, that'll make the process, I'm not going to say smooth, but it will maybe make those bumps a little bit smaller. We don't learn when we're in crisis. We don't learn when our brain chemistry is kind of figuring itself out and is out of whack. So trying to pre-teach some of those skills to be more familiar, so that when we need them, there's some working knowledge. At least it's not, oh, look, my body has completely changed, or these things are happening, and now you want me to do something different? Now you want me to learn a new skill on top of all the confusion that I'm having about everything else? That's not the time to do it. I think the biggest thing is to start early. Kind of normalize those conversations about body parts and about what things are going to happen when our kids are littler. Obviously, age developmentally appropriately, but it will also help to make it so it's not just that one big conversation, right? We don't want to sit down and have the talk. We want that to kind of happen as organically as possible. We want to be able, when these things crop up, to go, okay, see, that's what we were talking about. And so here are the tools that we have to deal with it, as opposed to my body's changing, my emotions are out of whack. So let's sit down and have this big talk about all these different things and all these different changes. That's going to be overwhelming. That's just not the time to do it. That's not going to be as effective. Now, if you miss the mark and that's where you're starting, okay, that's where we start. And then we do the best we can.
I love that idea of kind of trying to prepare ahead of time. I mean, I'm an old lady, okay? I'm 50 plus, and I'm thinking back to the horrible things that we had to go through in elementary school as girls, and then eventually the boys were in on the conversation, and it was awful. As my kids were approaching the age where they were going to be going through some of that human growth and development curriculum, especially with my son, who also has a cognitive disability, I'm like, I need to review that material before it's presented, because a lot of the social nuance, a lot of the relationship pieces, he wasn't really going to get. The materials for my son to have those conversations ahead of time weren't there. The materials weren't there. We had to find them and present them to the school district, which thank God embraced some of the things that I had brought in. But we were talking a little bit before we even started recording about how a lot of people with autism don't get the proper education about puberty, about sexuality, about their bodies, because sometimes that conversation is uncomfortable for parents. Sometimes schools don't have the resources, so you're either opting in or opting out. So I think reframing this and being prepared, even if they're not going through it in the moment, you can kind of point back to the conversations we had before and link it back in a teachable moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's so important to kind of think about as we have our littles going through and gearing up for those talks at school, right? The thing that I always say is puberty comes for us all. And puberty doesn't care if we are developmentally ready. It doesn't care if we are cognitively ready. Puberty is one of those kind of universal things that, barring any sort of physical issue that would be impacting the onset of puberty, puberty comes, ready or not. Holding our kids out of those conversations, or not at least trying to find an appropriate way for them to be able to understand it, really does a disservice to our kids. Because we feel like, as the amazing parents that we all are, that we're protecting our kids. Like, they're not ready for that. I don't know too many kids that are ready for it, really. But neurotypical kids will often have conversations about stuff like that with their peers. They'll pick up on some of those things on social media or videos. Whereas as parents, we tend to kind of shelter our kids from that. We try and protect our kids from accessing inappropriate content, or they may not have the social connections with peers where they're having those kinds of conversations. And so by not having them participate, or by not finding alternative curriculums and starting that conversation with them, it does a disservice, because then it goes from they have zero knowledge to here's all the things. We may not even think that they're ready, but hey, puberty's here. So we should probably bring them in on the secret. So it's important to, understand where your kid's at, but also understand that it's coming, regardless of whether you're ready or whether they're ready. Making sure that we can have those conversations and that we're not shielding them from them unnecessarily. Now, it might be in 4th grade when the public schools around here start that curriculum. That might not be the time, but I would encourage you to have that on your radar so that maybe you're ready to have those conversations, because those conversations are so uncomfortable. And I think that's another thing, is to really prepare yourself to be really uncomfortable. We all have our own comfort levels of talking about the different aspects of puberty just based on our own history and our, thoughts and beliefs and our values and things like that, sometimes we just don't talk about those things. It really is kind of getting yourself on board to be like, this is going to be an uncomfortable ride. When we have our neurotypical kids, they're picking up some of the stuff along the way, and we can talk at a more abstract level about what's going on, and they may be able to fill in the blanks a little bit easier on their own or with their friends or with social media or whatever. But with our autistic kiddos, we probably have to be a lot more specific, and we have to be a lot more black and white and blunt, and we might have to use pictures or diagrams, and that's really uncomfortable for a parent to do. Getting yourself prepared for that level of discomfort, and just kind of reminding yourself, like, I'm aware of my own discomfort in this. You can sit in that, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, it's all right. Well, this is what my kid needs. It's just like anything else that you've had to teach your kid. This is where we're at. This is how my child learns. They're a visual learner. They are a tactile learner. They need models that they can manipulate. And that can be really hard as a parent. So we'll just add that to the list of more uncomfortable things we do to help our kids succeed. It just really goes along with that. Being prepared, just kind of trying to not only prepare your kid, but prepare yourself too for that wild ride that will be puberty.
I appreciate that perspective so much. There's a lot of things that we've been talking about that I really was only looking at from a parent perspective and a parent of my own kids, and I don't really think about from a more community perspective. I thank you for bringing that in, because it normalizes my discomfort that I had with the whole thing. And along with my discomfort, I managed to find some resources along the way, because we did have to get specific about some things. My son clearly wasn't going to get that information from his friends. So I'm going to put in the description some of the resources that we used back in the day. And then, just having been at the Wisconsin Autism Conference in the spring of 25, the cool kids in the audience gave me some better resources too. So I'm going to drop those in the description in case those are helpful to you as parents. As you prepare, read the books, look at the diagrams, point to the pictures, practice saying them, so that it's not freaking you out when you're doing it in front of your kid for the first time, right? How awkward. They don't need to see your discomfort in that either.
No.
Not that they aren't entitled to their own discomfort, but
they're also learning from us what we should be uncomfortable about.
Sure. So as Justice was going through puberty, I was noticing some of his behaviors intensifying. He had a bunch of these little quirks as a prepubescent child that just seemed maybe wrapped up in his autism. And as the puberty hormones started washing over his brain, it was clear that some of those behaviors were becoming more troublesome for him. It was becoming harder to manage for us as a family. And eventually he ended up inpatient, hospitalized, and diagnosed with OCD. So I would imagine that this isn't unique to Justice, that some of these behaviors that might have been there before puberty, or some new behaviors that are popping up during puberty, might just be intensified by all of the stuff that's going on biochemically. Eventually, obviously, I knew we needed an intervention, but I didn't realize that was going to result in another diagnosis. I just thought this is what puberty does to autism. That wasn't the case for us. What behavioral changes parents are noticing in their autistic adolescent might be indicative of their changing hormones and metabolism?
No, the experience that you just described isn't necessarily unique. It's pretty common in that, we have these little bitties, and we're just maybe getting a diagnosis, and we're navigating that, and we're navigating the best way to help them. And if they have some aggressive behaviors, that's how they're expressing, what they need. And we finally are like, all right, we've got this under control. They've got some tools on board. They've got a little bit better, emotion regulation. This is great. And maybe, we get into a little bit of a sweet spot at, the tail end of elementary school. And then, wham, we've got puberty coming in. And I don't want to say it undoes things, but it just adds a whole new element that makes all of those tools and skills and things that we've already had on board so much harder to access. The skills are there. They don't forget them. They don't lose them. but it's so much harder to access because there's so many other things that are going on. And it really is biochemical. It's not, oh, they're a teenager, so they're just a little bit more moody or disrespectful or whatever it may be. Now, there is definitely some developmental appropriateness to being a moody teenager, to, oh, it's just the hormones. And those are very valid, but we can't just make that as the excuse for all of the things. So especially if you have a kiddo that has had some history of aggressive behavior or some difficulty kind of expressing themselves in a safe way, kind of be prepared for some of that maybe to come back. Not 100%, not in everybody, but a lot of times that is the case where we start to see in early middle school, which is, a great time for everybody, having some more of these aggressive behaviors that sets us apart from our peers a little bit more and adds that other layer of challenge. So looking for, I don't want to say necessarily behavior changes, but looking for things that are out of character for your kid. This is something, not necessarily like this is something new and out of the blue, and there will be some of those things, but you know your kid. You know whether this thing is really, really out of the blue, or well, this is kind of out of the blue, but it's a little bit like this other thing that we've already kind of experienced. So looking for kind of uncharacteristic behavior. Obviously, big behavior changes are going to be a huge thing. We have a lot of other kind of mental health diagnoses that tend to crop up around this time. Looking at them avoiding things a lot, more, whether it's avoiding things they used to do or it's more of a heightened avoidance of situations, of people, of anything like that. That could be an indicator of some anxiety. Look at them pulling away more. We definitely have our kids that prefer and enjoy their solitary time, but if you're noticing that maybe that's all that they're wanting, whereas before maybe they would interact a little bit more, they would seek out or they would tolerate having more social interaction, but if it's really becoming a bigger struggle for them to have people around them. Social challenges really start to become a lot more evident and that gap gets a lot wider. It might be kids who really enjoyed going to school are now not enjoying going to school. And it could be many, many different reasons. It could be because they're starting to notice like, hey, I'm not identifying with my peers as much anymore, or I'm being left out, or they're having these conversations and I have no idea what they're talking about. So it's just easier for me to kind of sit on the sidelines or go off by myself than trying to figure out this weird language that they have.
Ooh. I am afraid my buckle up quip might have sent the wrong message of ride it out. Mm-hmm. When should parents seek professional help for their autistic adolescent?
Like we were talking about before we started recording, a lot of times parents or just individuals will seek help when they're in crisis. And that's a really easy indicator that we need help, but that's almost a little bit too late. Now, that doesn't mean that when you're in crisis, don't bother. Like, obviously, 100% wholeheartedly, as soon as, you're ready and you're identifying that there's a problem, get that help. Absolutely. I think when we're talking about like adolescents and younger kids and getting into puberty, we really want to start having those conversations about therapy when we're noticing those big changes. Even if we're anticipating those changes, sometimes just having another set of eyes or another set of ears can be really helpful. Teenagers don't love always talking to their parents about everything. And so having another trusted person that they can run through some of these things can be really important. I think a really good indicator is when you're thinking about or trying to have those really uncomfortable conversations and you're going, you know what, I don't know how to do this. Or I'm not sure that right now I'm equipped to handle this conversation by myself. So I need to bring in some outside help. That's where a professional can come in because we can have those conversations. I can talk about those uncomfortable things with my clients because the stakes are different for me. And I've had those conversations. So, the more you talk about that stuff, the easier it becomes. I think before your child is starting to show some of those crisis signs can also be a great time if it's something that you're struggling with. And supporting parents is really important too. Having somebody else be able to have more of those matter-of-fact conversations can make it a lot easier. Obviously, if your child is expressing some sort of maybe suicidal ideation or you're noticing in their behavior if they're not able to tell you, but you're noticing there's something off, have it checked out. It could just be they're doing okay. They're just kind of going through puberty and it's something that's hard to navigate. But a lot of times puberty is really when we start to see the anxiety, the depression, OCD. We see those other kind of really commonly co-occurring disorders. Sometimes I'll even have parents that are like, hey, we're not really super struggling with anything right now, but we want to be prepared. We know it's coming. And that can be really helpful too.
Well, I know our family has been through our share of crises, and I know that we didn't see them coming and we didn't necessarily handle them well. So one of the whole points of this podcast is to help parents know better and do better. I'm going to share a lot of them are local resources here in southeastern Wisconsin for people to manage, but I will put some national resources in there as well to help you drill down to what's available in your area. Mental health interventions for our neurospicy kids are hard to come by. If you can find in your community what's available before you need it, everyone will feel so much better. It might not be exactly what you want, but maybe you know about a crisis response team. Maybe you know about a NAMI support group. Maybe you know that there are officers in your police department who have crisis intervention training. Those are all great things to know. Talk to a been there, done that parent. That can often be the greatest thing. If you don't already have a tribe that has a been there, done that parent or a support group that you really like, I encourage you to find one because it's just better to know these things proactively than reactively. Because like Katrina said, you as a parent, you're going to go through your own thing. So when your kid's going through crisis and they need you to be a rock and you're storm tossed, it's really difficult for everybody. Again, not that you aren't entitled to be rocked in that kind of a boat when you're going through a storm, but the more stable you can be for your kid who's going through so much instability, the better it's going to be for everyone.
I think saying buckle up is appropriate. I really do. I don't get the feeling that, you just got to kind of ride it out. No, it's I'm getting prepared because I know in order to get through this ride, I need to be safe and I need to buckle up and make sure that I have the tools to get through this. Because if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not giving ourselves that grace, then we're not doing the best we can for our kid.
Thank you so much for being here, Katrina.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
You talking about this big topic in a tiny format.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Chelsea's Vocation. We hope it was valuable to you. If it was, we'd appreciate you sharing it with someone, reviewing it, and/or rating it. Subscribe to the podcast to be notified when new episodes are published. We wish you the best as you learn, maybe unlearn, and do better for yourself and those around you. Chelsea encourages you to be gentle with yourself, be gracious with others, and be protective of your own and others' dignity. Until next time, take care.